Howdy, class. Humanities 4 Film Studies, Shasta College. Today is Monday, April 12th, 2021. We just had our spring break. Hope you did something interesting. Did you get some colored eggs? No? Did you not find them all? We're into the last couple of weeks of school. I think school gets out in another 6 weeks. So we've got lots of ground to cover. We've covered quite a bit, but you'll be relieved to hear the rest of it's going to have sound. It'll be all in color. Lots of special effects. We're coming into an era now. We're coming out of the decade of the 70s, which our test was based on. You're going to write a paper this week. I'm going to sign it tonight, but I will sign it on Wednesday, where you will be, you're going to write about one of those films that you probably saw in the documentary Easy Rider, Raging Bulls. So get ready for that. That'll be your 6th essay. Here's some bad news. I'm going to probably have to assign another 7th essay. I won't do it for about 2 weeks, so don't worry. And then the only thing we have left is your journals that I hope you're keeping up with. Weekly journals, daily journals, however you want to do it. Look at my samples I posted. And then we're not going to have a final quiz because we've already had a quiz, but we will be doing a final research paper, and it's going to be different than an essay paper. It's not going to be an essay, a critical essay. It's going to be a critical research paper about any topic you want to choose in cinema history, from silent era to modern times, folks. But you have to run it by me to get my approval. I just don't want you to write about your favorite film because you just love it so much you just can't wait to write about it. I'm going to steer you off that and hopefully steer you into something that you will learn something and broaden your horizons and open up an entire new world that you didn't think existed. I'm also going to print a list of subjects that you can write about. You can write about directors, genres, actors, I don't care, actresses, writers. Who's going to write about a writer? Interesting. Will anybody do that? Cinematographers. I'm going to have my next lecture is going to be on cinematographers, so please pay attention to that. That'll be in a day or two. They have a huge important part on the whole history of cinema, equally as important as the director. Everything we do is directed towards the director because it seems like he or she is the main ingredient. They're just part of the picture. So anyway, and I think I will be assigning a 7th essay because we have to fill up the space, folks. Sorry. I also want to talk today about the quiz. Now, the quiz is over. Most of you were thanking your lucky stars. A lot of you, I haven't graded them all yet. I'm close. And most of you, a bunch of you didn't do the quiz. That's up to you. That's a loss of 15 points. There was some confusion, I think, on the quiz. I'm glad it was only 15 points. At first, I made it 30 points, which was way too much. I knocked it down. I hope you guys saw that because assigning 30 points made it way too far important. But it was an important test of your abilities to think outside what we're been doing in this class, looking at the cultural significance of the cinema history. And this is a humanities class, so the cultural ingredient is hugely important. And I've been talking about it since the silent era. What was the significance of the success of the first silent era? How important was the Roaring Twenties? How important was Prohibition? How important to those filmmakers? How important was World War II? How important was the Depression? Post World War II. I always try to put it into perspective. What's going on? Like your last essays. I know your last essay is foreign film, but before that it was Rebel Without a Cause, On the Waterfront. Those are the post World War II movies I'm talking that had a very big effect on the new way of Hollywood looking at things, but what was going on in the world. We're coming out of the war. We're having prosperity. We have, but we also are in a Cold War with Russia, Soviet Union. That's important to this art of cinema because it's reflection into the movies. The 60s, you guys just went through it. You're going to write about 2 films from the 60s. I'll sign it this Wednesday. You saw that documentary. What was going on in the culture? That's what the whole quiz was about. Now, if you said, I'll give you an example. Name 2 cultural influences the culture had on the new auteur directors. One would be civil unrest, protest against the Vietnam War. That's what's going on culturally. The assassinations of Martin Luther King, John F. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King. Those are huge influences that are influencing these young directors that are starting to get a foot in the door in Hollywood. Civil rights, women's rights, that's huge. That's what's going on in the culture. So all he had to do is name 2 of them and explain in a sentence or 2 why that was important to these new filmmakers. Another one would be the youth market. Some of you got that. Drive-in movie theaters is huge. The market to tap into the youth market that the old Hollywood didn't know how to do. So the youth in America were very influenced by rock and roll and the new freedoms, supposedly, of that birth control gave people when it came to sex. That's the first time in the whole history we had that. No one's ever mentioned that. But this had a bearing on these new auteur directors who were young, just like their audience. And so they wanted to make movies that they wanted to see. Therefore, that's what the audience wants to see. And so these films like Badlands and Mean Streets and MASH and 5 Easy Pieces and Chinatown and Apocalypse Now and The Godfather and The Conversation, McCabe and Mrs. Miller, Nashville, Shampoo, Harold and Maude. These films came out of the minds of young people, younger directors who wanted to make something of meaning, not just for entertainment, but actually have some kind of authentic message, adult message. And they came into the system. Okay, so those are the influences that they were bringing in. What influences did they have on the culture? Everybody said the same things. Sex, drugs. No, that's wrong. I ask you, it's okay to say that, but I said in the instructions, please don't say sex and drugs because that stuff's been around forever. Folks, they've been having sex since the beginning of mankind. You think sex is just something that the hippies invented? Everybody's been smoking and drinking cocktails since they invented the cocktail. Now, what those movies showed, some of them, a few of them, Easy Rider, Midnight Cowboy, they showed marijuana being smoked. That's true. And that influenced the culture. Absolutely. Um, oh, other people are smoking pot and they're in the movies. That must be, and that it definitely influences the culture. The way people started seeing how other people reacted to the Vietnam War, to the civil rights, they saw that up on the screen and it influenced them to start thinking for themselves. After we saw The Graduate, just to give you an example, I was 16 or 15 when I saw The Graduate. I wanted to go to college because it looked so cool. Look, people are smart. I mean, because a large part of The Graduate is set in Berkeley. Beautiful woman at Berkeley, and you read books, you hang out in places, you talk intellectually. So it made college seem really like a cool, hip thing, and we couldn't wait to apply to Berkeley, Stanford, whatever. That influenced the audience. It influenced us in a way. You look at a movie like Five Easy Pieces, and we question our place in the world. We don't. I mean, how do you question your place in the world? I don't know how old you are, but say you're 22. Do you know what you want? Do you know where your dreams are? Do you know how you're going to accomplish them? Do you know who you're going to fall in love with? Do you know what your jobs are going to be? No. And those movies reflected that. And the people in the audience took solace in that there were other people in the universe like them who didn't know, who didn't have all the answers. And that influenced the audience. Besides smoking and drinking and drug taking, which a few of those movies had, not all of them had, a few of them did. Easy Rider, Midnight Cowboy, but most of them didn't. But they also were expressing a disappointment in our government, a distrust for the older generation, a distrust of corporate America. That influences the audience because that's what was in those movies. So many of them, not all of them, of course. And so that's a great answer. What brought the ending to the tour director came up? Guys like Martin Scorsese, Francis Coppola, William Friedkin, who had done The Exorcist and Conversation, not Conversation, but I can't think of what it was called. These are huge hit movies. Godfather, huge hits. And so they were making money. The studios didn't know how to make money with the young audience, but these new directors had ideas. And so they bring them to the bosses, the studio bosses, who had lost track of the new youth market. And they listened to these guys because their movies made money. But two movies changed everything. That changed all of that. One was Jaws by Steve Spielberg. First movie to ever make $100 million. And it's a very entertaining movie, not taking anything away from it. Absolutely. Is it socially enlightening? Not really. It's just a good old-fashioned yarn, Big Fish yarn, done very well. Made $100 million. That became the headline. Not the content of the movie, but the headline was how much money it made. We hadn't seen that before, ever. Now $100 million is done a big deal. I mean, it's still a big deal, but it's nothing like it is. Now you think $1 billion to be a big deal. And so the studios go, well, we came up with this concept. The auteur director didn't bring it to us. We hired him. We might know a thing or two how to get people back in the movie theater and away from their television sets and away from their rock and roll concerts and their drug taking, and make an old-fashioned B movie That's not a put down. That's just what they were considered as an entertainment. And the studio bosses figured they could do that. And then the next one that sealed the fate of the tour directors was Star Wars. Star Wars knocked Jaws out of the water. Nobody had ever seen anything like that money-wise. Yes, we'd seen films like that. Folks, sci-fi films go back a long ways. Star Wars is a really fun, entertaining, not very meaningful movie, and it's fake. You see if you want to see a real space movie, watch 2001: A Space Odyssey. Star Wars is swashbuckling like a serial that they used to run in the 40s, Buck Rogers, Flash Gordon. It's a bunch of people running around in spaceships with ray guns. Very funny script, funny performances. Harrison Ford made him a huge star. Carrie Fisher looking cute in her little exposing outfits. You know the drill. CPU-30 and R2-D2, they're cuter than hell. But it's just entertainment, folks. But it made so much money. And like Lucas said, I'm going to make more money on toys and lunchboxes and he was right. And so then it changed everything. The auteur director's day ended simply because the studio bosses took back control and they're going to make big budgeted B movies. A lot of you wrote that drugs killed the auteur directors. Not true. Yes, some of them got sidelined. Yes, they did. Most of all the directors who worked in that era, even though they might have got sidelined by the drug use, cocaine, whatever, the lavish lifestyles, all had successful careers that went on for many, many years. Yes, there was a few casualties that died later. Sam Peckinpah is one of them. He's an absolute casualty of booze and drugs, absolutely. But his day was long over by the time the 80s came. His last two movies, Convoy, it's almost unwatchable. Hal Ashby made some really cool movies until he died of cancer in the late 80s, which had nothing to do with his cocaine use. And let me tell you, remember when I talked about silent films? Fatty Arbuckle was partying like crazy. Folks, they were doing cocaine in those days too. And it brought him down. And booze. So lavish parties and cocaine and booze has been in the Hollywood system since day one. And I specifically said in the instructions, please don't say sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Some of you did still. Okay. Then you lose a couple points. So I know you're all, I haven't graded them all, and I got a bunch of people who were late, and so they had to email me their tests. They're late for whatever reason. That's all right. You'll lose points on that. That's just how it goes. I'll get to them. I'll get to them this week. No more tests. We're done. But those were the answers I was looking for. Some of you hit it spot on, and others were very confused. Okay, we're moving on now. The next assignment I'll sign on Wednesday will be an essay. On one of the movies that was from the documentary Easy Rider Raging Bulls. Don't worry about it yet. Right now, what's happening in Hollywood, we're coming out of this decade of the auteur director. The studios have firmly taken back control. They don't need these uppity, smart aleck auteur directors telling them what they're going to make. They are going to tell the auteur directors what they're going to make. And so this started the trend that we're pursuing to this day. Endless sequels. This is where the era of the sequels started, folks. And it started essentially with Star Wars. There had been sequels before. Godfather Part 1, Godfather Part 2. That's a sequel. But it really got off the ground in the 80s. How many Star Wars have there been made? Does anybody really know? From the original bunch, I think 3 maybe. The prequels, the sequels, the endless sequel prequels, they're still making them. Different generations. Here we are 40 years. Star Wars first came out in 1977. So here we are 44 years later, still making endless sequels, still wondering what happened to CP3O? What happened to, it's fine. It's a cultural phenomenon. Absolutely. Absolutely. Other films are starting the trend of the superhero trend. Superheroes didn't start with the millennials making Spider-Man and Batman. This stuff's been around forever. They did Superman back in the 50s. Batman was a television show. But they reintroduced Superman as a feature film, big budgeted Superman, budgeted film, a movie. It's a B movie, meaning it's a melodrama against good and evil, done with a lot of money and special effects. And when the first Superman came out with Christopher Reeves, Margot Kidder, they didn't have CGI like they do now. Now it's all CGI. It's all green screen, and they could have them flying around Mars. Doesn't matter. They used to have to do it the old-fashioned way with invisible lines that they're hung from the ceiling in the studio. That's how they're flying, folks. Now they fly them around because the computer allows it. And so Superman 1, 2, 3, whatever, however they made with him, then he got in a horrible accident, and they're still making Superman. So that's when these things started, was in the 80s. A lot of things happened in the 80s. This is where the culture comes in. Why the switch? Why the switch from the idealistic 60s and 70s where we thought change could happen? We got rid of Richard Nixon. The Vietnam War finally wound down. Women got the right to have their own charge card. Do you know women couldn't have their own charge card? It had to be in their husband's name, folks. So all you females out there who really dig your charge card, in 1972, you couldn't have a charge card unless you had a husband and it was his charge card. That all changed with the women's movement. Feminism is not a dirty word. It's the power of getting equal rights. It's not about holding the door open for a guy or a girl or using this different bathrooms or whatever, that it's been muddled up. Feminism is all about getting equal rights for women. Just like the civil rights was about getting civil rights for African Americans in this country. And a bunch of people had to die for it. And we're still fighting for it. Look what's going on right now with all the police shootings. We're still dying for this. Black people are still dying for civil rights. Whether you agree with that or not, don't take my word for it, it's the truth. Okay, so films are reflecting that. We're coming out of a presidency, Jimmy Carter, who was considered too soft and kind of a pacifist. He wasn't tough enough like the Ronald Reagan was. And so Reagan came out, preaching how corporations are the best things to happen, taxes are bad, big government is bad. What's good is trickle down economy, meaning the more money these corporations make, they're going to trickle their profits down to us. And they're going to make our lives better through the goodness of trickle down profits. Never happened, folks. That was the pipe dream. Never happened. Because you know what happens when people make profits? They keep them. They don't trickle anything down. You think IBM and Apple Computer is going to trickle down their profits to you? That is wishful thinking that never happened. But that was going on in the world. Also, don't forget, my favorite genre of music, punk rock, was rearing its vicious head because it was bashing against that, the corporate lie. So that's what's going on in the culture. Also, Wall Street becomes the main focus in our culture, making money. There was a term that came popular in the 80s called yuppies, young urban professionals. And they were young people who were going off to work at corporate jobs in big cities, San Francisco, LA, Chicago, New York, and they called them yuppies. They were there to make a boatload of money. And then greed became a big thing. If you ever saw the movie Wall Street, that's what it's about, folks. The money grab was on. And so that reflected in the movies that were being made in Hollywood because of what was going on in the politics of the land right now. And Reagan was a hugely popular president. His wife had her great Nancy Reagan, her whole thing about, I know how to get rid of drug addiction. I know how to stop the drug taking in America. Just say no. Simple as that. And it was everywhere. Just say no. Another wishful idea. Simple. Just say no. How easy is that? Didn't work out. We're addicted now to more drugs than we've ever been in the history of the world. Drugs and over-the-counter drugs, prescription drugs, illegal drugs. We're addicted to everything. Sweets, junk food. Saying no is not so easy, and it really hasn't worked out. So there was this idealistic, we could be the greatest, richest. We could all have money, lots of money. And so Hollywood reflected that in the movies they were making. They figured that's what the audience wants to see. They don't want to see the guys from Easy Rider who are smoking pot and they're upset over the way the world looks, or the guys from Five Easy Pieces who's disgruntled, doesn't know where his place in the world is, or Chinatown, or One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, where Jack Nicholson is literally in an insane asylum. We don't want to see those downer things. We want to see successful people. And so that's what the movies looked like, too. That's what the audience was. They went from character-driven, honest cinema to feel-good, entertainment, action-packed sequels. Heroic, fake heroics, like in Top Gun. I know you like the film, folks. That's all fake. It's all bravado. But in the meantime, there were other movies being made that were worthy, but they weren't an easy sell. I'm going to talk more about them on Wednesday, but I'm going to give you a heads up about that because I don't want to go too long here today. But there was several filmmakers. Still no women, folks. Still a male-dominated world. But a guy by the name of director by the name of David Lynch and starting to make inroads into regular Hollywood with offbeat, nightmarish films. Jim Jarmusch was a New York filmmaker, hipster, he and I are the same age. We like the same music. We like, and his take on movies are starting right now. Another director by the name of John Sayles, who was a screenwriter and a novelist. He would make his money selling screenplays to Hollywood, then he'd make independent films like The Return of the Secaucus 7, Mount 1, and other films. Meaningful independent films. This is when the independent era started. We're not quite there yet. That really happens later on, around early 90s, late 80s. But it was rearing its head now. And these films were getting seen. I saw, believe it or not, Stranger in Paradise, Jim Jarmusch's first film, which I think came out in 1980, in a theater, folks, in Beverly Hills when I lived in LA. What? It's an art film, black and white art film, made with unknown actors on $60,000. That's how much that movie cost. And it played at the Cineplex. Wow, that's something. Couldn't wait to see his next movie. Later on in the 80s, Spike Lee started making his inroads. She's Got to Have It. And more that came about that era. And these, to me, are the filmmakers that saved cinema as a thinking man's artwork, a mature piece of art that had meaning and resonance and just wasn't about the money grab. I'll end it on that. See you guys next time when the story of film continues.